Hi, I'm Leah Wheatholter, CEO and founder of Workman Forensics, and this is the Data Sleuth Podcast. For the 2024 season, we are changing it up a bit. I've invited Justin Burns, a forensic accounting professional and fraud fighter, to guest host the episodes. He's one of the friendliest and most personable professionals I've met in this space, and I'm excited for you all to meet him and his guests.
Hi everyone. As Leah mentioned, I'm Justin Burns, Managing Partner of Space Coast Forensics in Brevard County, Florida, and I'm your host for this season of the Data Sleuth Podcast. I'm excited to host this season titled Conversations About Fraud, where we'll tackle topics including embezzlement, collaborative divorce, economic damages, construction fraud, and more. In each episode, I'll be joined by an expert to help tell the story behind the numbers. In today's episode of the Data Sleuth Podcast, Matt Storlie and I are going to talk about data analytics. Matt Storlie is a senior manager in the Forensic and Litigation Services Department of Whipfly out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. With nearly 30 years of experience in business and accounting, fraud examinations, data analysis, internal audit, and IT systems, Matt Storlie assists clients with forensic services, internal investigations, computer forensics, e-discovery and litigation readiness, and fraud risk assessments. As one of the firm's subject matter experts on data analytics, he utilizes his deep experiences with IT systems, internal controls, and data analytics to develop proactive, risk-based anti-fraud models and programs, and is a certified data analyst of IDEA software. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining me on today's episode.
Hey, Justin. Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, I know you work on all kinds of engagements, including forensic accounting engagements, internal investigations, and e-discovery and litigation readiness. But today I want to focus on the data analysis portion of your job. I know you're one of your firm's subject matter experts on data analytics. Can you tell me what it is about data analytics that you find so interesting?
Sure. Yeah. I think I've actually been doing data analytics for a long time, longer than I've been a fraud investigator. I became a certified fraud examiner let's just say 17 or so years ago. But I've actually been doing data analytics longer than that, a good 20 plus years. I started in internal audit doing data analytics for a large Fortune 50 retailer here in the Twin Cities. And I think what I found most fascinating about data analytics is the ability to take data, because every organization has data, and create something with it, make something useful out of the data, tell a story with the data, if you will. You hear a lot about, data is the new oil, different little quotes like that. And I think there really is a lot of power in data. And I just, as long as you have good data to work with and you are creative enough to tell a really good story, it can be very powerful. In internal audit, especially when I was working in internal audit, I just noticed that if we had a problem, let's say, or an issue that we had identified, and we were trying to figure out how big of an issue it really was, using data analytics to really quantify that issue, I found very, very powerful, because we didn't know if it was a small or big issue. A lot of times I can feel like a gut feeling, like, is this a big issue or not? We use that data to actually quantify it. And is it a $5,000 issue? Is it a $5 million issue? Once we got the data and figured it out, we kind of knew exactly how big of an issue it was. In forensics, I've used data analytics the entire time I've been a fraud investigator. They've gone hand in hand, and I've used analytics to find the needles in a haystack and to, basically identify all of the additional fraud that is. We may know there's some fraud, but the analytics can really help kind of fill out the picture and identify all the other potential fraud as well as we're doing the investigation. So I just find a lot of power in data and analyzing it. I did have a computer science background in college, so I think that kind of affected me a little bit as well. I do enjoy working with programs and programming, and so data analytics also just feels like kind of another natural outgrowth from that as well.
Yeah, and I feel like as a forensic accountant, we may not say what I'm doing is data analytics, but a lot of what we do is data analytics, whether we call it that or not.
Right.
And you mentioned working with different programs and things like that with your computer science background. It feels like every conference you go to or every continuing ed thing you go to lately, there's sessions on AI. The most recent conference I went to, 3.5 day conference, it felt like one whole day was all sessions about AI and how AI is going to change accounting and ways you can
Right.
implement it. You know, how do you see AI being used, you know, to assist with data analytics, or how do you see data analytics changing with the implementation of AI?
Sure. I mean, it is, what's coming up on, I think 2 years now since kind of Chat GPT exploded. I think it was November of 22. And it was fascinating to see the quick adaptation of it. Everyone talks about that. And you're right. Every conference, we've attended or been a part of, it seems like, and even like the Institute of Internal Auditors had an AI analytics and automation conference earlier this year. So it is the talk everywhere. As far as accounting and data analytics specifically, we have to remember it is only a couple of years old for the most part. I really kind of see AI as more of an exploratory thing right now. And when it comes to accounting and data analytics, I think we need to be careful as far as how much we're exploring within AI and utilizing AI for that portion of it. And I see data analytics as a very finite, contained sandbox that we're doing all my analytics in. When it comes to artificial intelligence, like again, I think it feels more exploratory. I think maybe if you've got something that's maybe more autonomous, where you want to utilize something on a recurring basis, and things are set pretty well as far as all of the analytics and the metrics and stuff, then it could be a very effective tool for that kind of speeding up processing, if you will. But I think we're still in the early stages of it. I still see so many clients that still struggle even with some basic data analytics. I just think it's going to be a long time for that maturity curve to really grow, and for AI to be fully integrated into accounting and analytics. But I think utilizing the power of machine learning, generative AI, and all these buzzwords out there, I think we will continue to utilize it as much as we can going forward. But I'm a little bit, I think it's going to take a little while for us to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's useful for here, just churn some numbers, things like that. But it sounds like what you're hinting at is you still need a human touch to it. You still need a practiced professional to have some
Right.
judgment in there. And that's one of the things that we talked about getting ready for this podcast was, one thing I think you brought up multiple times. I kept hearing you say data correlation, and having the human ability is not really something that AI is able to replicate yet. Can you talk?
Right.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. I mean, just think about I'm sure a lot of folks have tried AI and they, maybe generated an image or something, and how it just may not look quite right. Something's a little off.
It can never get
Same thing can
hands
happen.
right for some reason.
So 6 fingers,
Yeah.
whatever it is, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just not quite there yet. And I think it does. I kind of feel like the work that I've been doing over 20 years in data and analytics has been human intelligence and not artificial intelligence. And it's, you do need that human touch. You need to set the boundaries. You need to set the parameters. You need to ensure that the data that whatever program you're using, that you are ingesting, that it's, you think of AI too, you think of it massive amounts of data, but how much of that is garbage in, that's going to be garbage out once it goes through the other side, right? So ensuring that the data that you have coming in is we'll say cleansed or normalized, is in a good spot. And then, the correlation piece is kind of the next piece of it. Think of machine learning as kind of human learning too, right? So if I want to identify something, I do some exploratory kind of analytics and profiling of the data, but then once I start trying to correlate the data and make more sense of it, imagine that you don't have, you don't get a flat file with every possible field you can imagine and every row imaginable, right? You don't just get like one big massive file. you have to realize when you're starting to try to correlate data, I've done multiple presentations on this, is, you have to think more like a computer system in the fact that you have multiple databases. You have to think with relational databases, and realize if you're looking at an accounts payable file or purchasing file, you're going to be missing some data. You might have a vendor ID, but you're not going to have all the other information from the vendor included in that file necessarily. So you're correlating data really gets to the point of having multiple databases and correlating the data between the databases so that you can really start to build more robust testing and analytics from that. And that is just something that it takes a human touch. It takes iterations, and we can try to speed it up potentially with AI. But I think for now, it's still, we need to be the drivers of that, generating that, those developing models, generating the information, whatever we need to do. The formulas, everything to build that at this point. But yeah, I think I think that's just the human aspect of it. And there's a creativity piece too, which I think maybe we'll talk about as well. But creatively, right? There's only so much that an AI type model might be able to do. As a fraud investigator, the sky's the limit as far as what you can come up with as far as fraud tests and stuff. And that's something, again, I don't think an AI type model is necessarily going to have. You're going to have to feed that into the model for it to know how to actually process all that data.
Yeah, and also you're talking about you put the data in, you're getting the results from it, but I don't know that I'd feel comfortable relying on AI to do the interpretation piece. Sure, do my calculation, pull, ones that based on my parameters, like here's the transactions that meet your parameters that you say look funny or whatever, however I term it. But let me do the interpretation on my side. And there's other AI programs out there that, attorneys are always like, well, let me just pop this into ChatGPT and it'll fix all my wording for me. And there's other ones to help you with the writing if that's something that you want, but it should all come from your ideas. Like I use an AI program for my email it's a plugin on Word, Grammarly, because I'm not the greatest with punctuation and spelling, all that stuff. And it helps me that way.
Yep.
But the idea is everything's still mine. I don't really feel comfortable with an AI program running my calculations and then telling me how it's interpreted it yet.
Right.
So
yeah, and would you? I think it's like first drafts of something, right?
Right.
And it's kind of an idea of something, but you still need to ensure that idea comes to fruition in the right way. And you wouldn't want to present upper management something that you ran through AI or if I'm doing a fraud investigation, I wouldn't want to utilize it and say, well, yep, ChatGPT said this, so it must be fraud. I mean, there's always the validation piece, the verification piece that has to come after that to ensure that what you're relaying is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, because you're still responsible for the end product. You can't just go back and be like, oh, well, I plugged this in and, this is what it gave me. Well, that doesn't sound great.
Right.
So,
right. And I can't stress enough the importance of the quality of the data that you're utilizing as well. Even before you get to kind of the fun analytics, I really see kind of this. I spend a lot of my time at my firm on the front end process, the cleansing process, the normalizing process. And that's also where it gets kind of fuzzy for me with AI. Because it's like, can we completely rely on all this data coming in? There's a lot of unstructured data out there, but I'm typically working in structured data for the most part. Probably 90% of the work I do is in structured data. And so I want to ensure that data that I'm pulling in and putting into my model or doing whatever with, is accurate, is complete and accurate. Otherwise, it is going to be garbage in, garbage out, GIGO, the old acronym. So, before you start doing, and I've, in my experience, I've seen it's typically been 65-75% of the effort is really that cleansing upfront effort before you even get into what I call kind of doing the fun analytics stuff. So I think I just wanted to make that a point as well. It's like that front part is really important before you get into What I find too often too are firms where they will decide, let's say they're in the middle of an audit, and they'll decide halfway through the audit, oh, let's run some analytics on this. And you and I both know at that point it's going to be tough, because you don't know if you're going to get data, if it's going to be good data, and there's this whole process that you go through. So as much as you can push that to the front end planning part of whatever project you're on, the better off you're going to be. But I just wanted to kind of talk about that too, because I don't want to, I feel like sometimes it's glossed over, but it's a real critical, important aspect of any data analytic project that you might be performing.
Right. And I just want to ask you about a couple terms you used there: structured versus unstructured data. Can you tell us the difference?
Sure. I mean, structured data, you really think of a database, right? You think of columns and rows, and that's typically what we're working with in data analytics. But we are seeing more and more application of unstructured data, which is emails. It's whatever unstructured data you can kind of think of that you can't put into a box necessarily. And I know with a lot of the AI type products, I think they do utilize a lot of that information. I tend to stick primarily with the structured data, because again, it's kind of, I feel like I can put structure around it, and I know exactly what it is I'm looking at. Even if I have multiple tables that I'm working with, most of the time that information is structured, and I can correlate it and do all the analytics that I want.
Perfect. All right. And I think that gets us to our ad break. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Breaking into the field of forensic accounting can be overwhelming, leaving you wondering where to begin. The best way to gain experience is by working cases. But how do you work cases to learn without the results impacting the outcome of a real case? Leah's book, Data Sleuth, Using Data in Forensic Accounting and Fraud Investigations, contains case studies and solutions for you to practice planning a case, from identifying the client's concerns and connecting them to the appropriate analyses and finding the most relevant data to perform the analysis. Build your confidence in addressing client needs through reliable analyses using the Data Sleuth book and free practice downloads as a guide by ordering your copy today on Amazon.
All right, we're back from break with Matt Storlie talking about data analytics. Before the break, Matt, you talked about getting creative in your data analytics, and it's something as forensic accountants we have to do just to solve whatever issue we're running up against. Sometimes we gotta get creative, and it's part of the job that I love. Do you have any case examples for us where you've had to be really creative with your analytics to help solve a case?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got a lot of examples. Been doing this a long time, and one case that kind of strikes me as being able to utilize it more than any other. I've done a lot of fraud investigation, forensic cases, embezzlements, whatnot. And one case I worked on a few years ago was actually was turning into a class action lawsuit out of California, and it was we were representing the company, essentially the defendant. So it was an individual who was starting to bring a class action lawsuit against the company. California, of course, it's pay, it's wage and labor type stuff, and it was a wage and labor case where they were claiming that the time systems that the company was using was rounding down, affecting the calculations and rounding down. So it was basically they're claiming that they were getting underpaid, and were also not getting paid for, say, meal breaks and lunches and stuff like that, because of the way the systems were operating within the company. And so it was interesting, because it was really a data analytics heavy case, and I worked on the case, and I was basically queuing up to be potentially even a testifying expert, explaining all the data analytics that was the driving force behind the case for the defendant, in this case the company. And of course, it was a situation where there were multiple. It was a long time period, almost 5 years maybe. And so there were multiple systems involved as well. They had one system, they switched to a different system, then they went back to the other system. So, it was a case where I was dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records, time records, and multiple systems, multiple formats. And we got creative because we wanted to kind of illustrate, because they were trying to make it a class action lawsuit, illustrate how the system wasn't actually decrementing that individual's time? Was it maybe potentially assisting others? Maybe some of the time was going down, some was going up. So we worked with a sample, but then we also looked at all the records to kind of see on a time basis to kind of see how exactly everything was being calculated. And there are just there's a lot of data, and there's a lot of slicing and dicing, trying to correlate that data and figure out exactly what was going on. And at the end of the day, we identified that some people were benefiting from this, some people were not benefiting from this. The reality was, like on an individual basis, overall, it was actually pretty darn close. And so what we were able to do through the case was identify basically, that what this individual was trying to bring forward and trying to turn into a class action lawsuit, they were going to have a hard time proving it in court because we had hard numbers and data analysis that really illustrated that it was not necessarily the case. It didn't go to court. It went to mediation, and I think they identified what was going on in the analysis and could kind of see that, this they were going to have a hard time proving this because we had already kind of done a lot of the work to prove the other side of it, and they ended up settling in mediation. So as opposed to this becoming a very large class action lawsuit, hundreds or tens of millions of dollars, they were able to settle in mediation. My client was, and it was interesting because the day that they were in mediation, I was ready all day just in case they were to call to have me, talk about exactly how I performed the analysis. So it was just kind of an interesting first time I had done a case like that was really kind of not fraud per se, but it was using the analytics to actually prove the case.
Yeah, and I mean, you just kind of get handed this puzzle, and you're talking about the different systems. You got all these pieces that don't really jive with each other, and you've got to figure out how to make them make sense along with each other. So yeah, certainly some creativity involved, and I feel like that's a lot of our job is, okay, how can we answer the question that our clients have with what we're able to get?
Right. Right. And I like to say too, Justin, that whenever we're presenting, right, we do have a puzzle to put together, but we don't have a box. So as a reference, that's what makes it so hard. There's no linear progression. You're kind of all over the place, and you have to be willing to go to those spots and connect those dots to try to figure it out. So.
Yeah, you have no idea what it's going to look like at the end. You just got to figure out how to get it all put together and see what the ending is.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So, do you have any other case stories where maybe, the data analytics really shined through? Like you talked about, in the California class action case where you did the data analytics and the other side didn't really have as big of a case as they thought they did.
Right.
Is there another one like that where maybe they thought it was bigger or smaller and the data analytics got run and, it really shined through for you?
Yeah, I worked on a financial statement fraud case many years ago. So I have I have several models that I've built using analytics to identify potential fraud, waste, and abuse. And the model is really used, and I present on it quite frequently as well to the Institute of Internal Auditors, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, whatever. I do a lot of presentations on this because it kind of combines a lot of what we're talking about today about cleansing the data, correlating the data, and then being creative with the analytics. So this model, but it's more of a proactive model. But in this case, it was a fraud investigation that I worked on, and it was the head CFO, controller, whatever you want to call the individual, had committed this financial statement fraud and was booking a lot of journal entries trying to essentially hide what he had done. And the way it got stumbled upon was 1 month he forgot to do the entries, or he's on vacation or whatever it was, and all of the amounts were sitting in one balance sheet account, which got stumbled up in consolidations to overseas to the corporate headquarters, and they noticed this balance sheet account with like $15 million. And they're like, what is this? And they found out that this guy had been committing financial statement fraud, and used my model that I built. And it has a lot of anti-fraud flags that it looks for. It uses kind of a risk methodology as well. So, This is where the correlation comes in and getting creative. Like, okay, if you do identify something, how big of a deal is it, right? Is it a big deal or not within each one of these tests? Because I knew that this guy, when he did admit to doing the fraud, he said that there were 10 accounts that he had affected. So because I knew that, I integrated that into the model. And again, this is where the human interaction comes in. So I'm like, all right, let's just take my model. Let's create some additional fields here. Let's look for these 10 accounts and see what else we can find. Well, when it was all was said and done, the model identified 15 additional accounts that he had affected that he had not admitted to. So in working with the internal auditors at the company, they were reconciling those 10 accounts thoroughly. They had to expand their scope to 25 accounts to add these additional accounts in there. The other thing that was interesting was it was one of the first times, because the external auditors were on the hook for this fraud because they didn't identify it, or they were like concerned about it. They wanted to know, all right, well, how did you identify, what are you using? So they actually tested my model, which was good because it had never been tested before. They had me tweak it a couple of times, so that was interesting. But in the end, it ended up holding up. So I felt really good about it. Like, okay, this thing really does stand the test. It works, Somebody else tested it, so that was good. That was good to find out as well. But it was the interesting side note to this case is, along with all the analytics, this was one of those situations I guess you'd call effective altruism. So it was an interesting case where the CFO, controller, whatever, was doing this to make the division look not as bad as it actually was, better than it was, because it was about ready to potentially be sold off in this company. And so he was trying to, in essence, keep the division looking fairly profitable. Everyone's jobs were on the line. The lawyers were not thrilled about that. They didn't think that could be the case. Had me run a bunch of additional analytics to look through payroll, look through purchasing, and to see, okay, this guy had to have taken money out somehow, taken cash out of the company somehow. But with all the tests we ran, we really could not see that. We couldn't see bonuses tied to, performance or anything like that. So it truly was a case where he was just trying to keep the division afloat, basically not get sold off from the company. But it was interesting to not only use the analytics, identify additional accounts that need to be looked at that he didn't admit to right away. Maybe he just forgot them because he had so many different entries he was trying to make. And then ultimately have the model kind of get tested and proven out as well.
So he didn't benefit at all other than getting to keep his job. Like, there's nothing extra?
Right. Nothing extra. And, we spent a lot of time running a lot of different tests. And I was a forensic investigator at that time. I knew what kind of tests to run. I knew what to look for ghost employees, fictitious vendors. I did all kinds of tests and could not identify cash going out. And the lawyers still were not happy about it. They wanted something else to pin on this guy, but they did have him commit financial statement fraud, and that was still, an offense, and he still, paid the price for it. But it was not. Yeah, he did not. You think of the fraud triangle, right? There's just, it seems like it's like, all right, how's he benefiting from this? But we really had a hard time proving that piece of it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's surprising. You think, so you going back to the fraud triangle, certainly that rationalization of like, well, I'm keeping this thing afloat by my acts. Like, surely I'm entitled to something, but really it was just, let's just keep everybody employed and keep this division going.
Yeah, and you hear more. You're hearing more and more. I think about some of these effective altruism cases where they're it's for the benefit of others potentially, kind of a thing. And there's not a lot of them out there, but this was one of them. And it was from quite a while ago, so it's interesting.
Yeah, that one is really, really, really interesting. Wow. So, Matt, this has been a great conversation. We've had a great podcast recording. Is there anything in particular that you want our listeners to walk away from this knowing?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it. Thanks, Justin. I've mentioned a few times, over the course of this podcast. Anytime I do a project or I do a presentation, which I do a lot of them, at the beginning I talk about 3 C's, and that's kind of the last thing I want everyone to remember, because there's a lot of stuff discussed during my presentation or whatever. It's, there's a lot of information that I tackle, but Cleanse. So anytime you're working on a data analytic project, make sure you're cleansing the data. Don't skip over that. That's incredibly important. 3 C's: cleanse, correlate. We talked about correlating the data and make it a much more robust analysis. And then finally, create. Be creative. And so, those are the 3 C's: cleanse, correlate, and create. So, if you kind of apply those to whatever data analytic project you work on, I think you'll probably be successful if you stick with those 3 C's.
Yeah, if you stick with those 3 C's, your end product is going to be a lot better. Your data analytics are going to be a lot more useful.
Absolutely. Definitely.
All right, so our listeners want to connect with you after the podcast. What is the best way for them to do that?
You're welcome to go on LinkedIn. I've got a LinkedIn page. Look for Matt Storlie, and you'll find me. Company is Whipfly that I work for. And I'm happy to connect with you there. And then, if we connect there, I'm happy to send an email address. My email address is matt.storlie@whipfly, WIPFLI.com. And either one of those ways is a great way to get a hold of me. So.
Perfect. We'll include those links in the show notes. And
excellent.
Thank you for being our guest today. Thank you for talking with us.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. It's been great. I'm happy to be a part of the Data Sleuth Podcast. Thanks for having me, Justin.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Data Sleuth Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you listen. The Data Sleuth Podcast is a production of Workman Forensics. To learn more about our investigation services and resources, please visit workmanforensics.com.